Hey there, it's BoardGameDave, and today we're taking a look at this gigantic game called Luthier from Paverson Games, who was kind enough to send me this prototype copy as well as this fantastic t-shirt. In Luthier, you'll play as a member of a family of luthiers, who are master artisans who craft primarily stringed instruments. Now, as you can see behind me, I know a thing or two about stringed instruments. I've actually been playing the violin and the viola for most of my life, and I'm also a music teacher. So when they reached out to me about this game, I said, absolutely send it my way. This is a theme that's right up my alley, crafting instruments and meeting composers and performing on the stage and all those fantastic, classical music things. So I was very excited to get a copy and get it to the table. Now, I should tell you that this game is currently on Kickstarter right now through August 8th. So you're gonna wanna start thinking about whether this is a game that you want to back, but first, you need to know how this game plays. So let's head to the table. I'll give you a really quick gameplay rundown, and then we'll come back up and I'll tell you my first impressions on Luthier. All right, so maybe I should have warned you ahead of time. This is a very broad and daunting and overwhelming board at first glance, but fear not, I'm going to talk you through every section here so you have a brief general understanding of how this game works out here on the main board, as well as your player board. So, in this game, as I mentioned earlier, you represent a member of a family of luthiers who are building instruments and appeasing patrons and so on and so forth. At the beginning of the game, you're going to start with a unique family crest, right? This thing. And each family starts with a unique set of starting resources and some sort of beginning ability or ongoing ability. So each player has a unique asymmetric thing going on, which is really interesting in this game. So that goes there. And then this is where your patrons go. And this is a big part of the game. Well, so patrons are going to come from the salon over here, right? And as you grab them, you're going to get some resources or some benefits. And then each patron has requirements you need to fulfill. So in this case, Beethoven wants you to build a string instrument and then repair a keyboard instrument or perform a classical concert. That's what's happening here. That's what those icons represent. So you want to make sure you're getting that done in a timely manner, because each round at the beginning of the round, your cube is going to move one space over and trigger whatever that patron wants to give you. So in this case, a wooden resource, right? Next would be an animal resource. And finally, if this cube ever makes it all the way to the end, the patron has lost its patience with you and you're going to lose points based on unmet requirements and your patron goes away. So it's important that you're kind of satisfying their requirements in a, speedy manner. So that's your player board. Resources go here. This is where you're going to rough your instruments and finish your instruments, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But first, let's focus on the main board out here and the core mechanism of this game, which is a blind bidding worker placement system. So what does that mean? Well, at the beginning of the game, you're going to start with 3 workers, right? 1, 3, and 5 different values. And on your turn, all you're going to do in the preparation phase is place one of your workers somewhere on those action spaces or on your own player board. So maybe I go here to repair an instrument, right? And then the green player goes there too, and then blue player goes here, and then I go to perform, and then green goes to the salon, and then I go to guild, and so on and so forth. And we'll put this right here. All right. So that's the preparation phase. Your workers go out on the board. During the resolution phase, whoever's first player gets to choose any action space and activate all the workers there, which is a really interesting caveat. So let's say it's the blue player. Let's say it's us, red player, right? And we want to resolve this repair action stack here. So we flip this over and we keep this in order, right? Like so, 3, 4, 5. Now, the first thing that happens is based on your value, right? You get priority. So 5 would go here, 3 would go to the back, and we'd go blue, green, red. And that's the order you would resolve the repair action, which is really interesting because there's very cheap cards, there's more expensive cards as well. So first come, first serve, right? They might get the really convenient cheap card and then everyone else has to pay a little bit more. So that's how we resolve these action spaces. By the way, there's also apprentices you can use to add 1 value strength to your token. So if I had gone here, by the way, with 2 apprentices, right, that would make this a 5 essentially. And because I was there first, I actually get tie-breaking privileges. So then I would go first on this action space. So I hope you're understanding that's a little bit vague or hard to explain at first, but let's talk about these action spaces quickly. We already know about the salon. This is where you recruit patrons to kind of patronize your shop. So Handel, there's composers, and there's famous nobility, emperors, and things like that. Down here is where you're going to perform concerts. So this is a little bit thematically tenuous, but you've got the type of music you're performing. So in this case, we're doing a Baroque performance, and you're going to add to the value worker that you went there some dice. So you're going to roll a pair of dice right here. Right? And depending on the number of eighth notes that show up, in this case, I rolled 0. But let's say it was this, right? You'd add 5 to your value, so 2 plus 5, and I'd score a medium performance. I get some money, and I get to put a token out here in the orchestra, which we'll talk about more in a sec. So salon, this is performing. Over here's the guild. This is where you're going to be building instruments. So when you go there, you're going to take an instrument and put it in your hand. Later on, you'll get to play that out in your roughing bench area. You pay those resources when you go to this action to move it over to this side, and then you pay these resources to finish the instrument, right? This is a big way to get points. In this case, we have 4 points here, and you get to put your instrument token somewhere in the orchestra. Now, I'll go ahead and talk about this now. Obviously, there's a lot going on here. This is the end of a 2-player game, but what's happening is these big tokens, right? As you put these out, you claim first chair, right? And if you do first chair, you'll see there's benefits here like money and resources and inspiration tokens and even apprentices and things like that. So it's very important to be first chair. If I went in here later with a lesser token, either a performance token like this or a repair token, right? I don't get first chair. Instead, I get 2 coins or 1 inspiration. However, one more caveat. If the space is open and I go in there with the token, well, I automatically take first chair. And I get to keep first chair until somebody else comes in there with, by building an instrument, right? Specifically a lute in this case, or if somebody comes in there with more tokens than me. So if red player performs and then later builds that type of instrument, they take precedent and take first chair. And that'll be important at the end of the game because depending on the number of first chair spaces you have, you're going to score points accordingly. So that can be a big source of points. So all that to say, building instruments is the best way to get first chair out there in the orchestra because this trumps other tokens, as I said. All right, down here is the repair action. So you can take these, and this you're going to do immediately. You're going to pay the resources, you get some points, and you put your repair token out on the board. And as I said, that can help you claim first chair. Beyond that, there's the balcony. That's where you can complete these objectives, which will kind of help us talk about endgame. And then down here is the market where you can buy and sell resources based on a fluctuating market for animal resource, wood resource, and metal resource. So let's go ahead and fast forward to the end of the game. At the end of the game, we have some endgame scoring based on, as I said earlier, your first chair sitting in the orchestra. This is your personal objective. So every player is going to start the game with 2 personal secret objectives that you're going to want to accomplish to gain a low amount of points all the way up to 5, 6 points, as you can see here. Okay? In addition to that, you also have these objectives up here. I guess that's not endgame scoring, I should say. I should take that back. But as you complete this, you can visit the balcony to put your scoring token on here based on randomly generated different scoring criteria. Like in this case, this is performances out here in the orchestra. That's repairing different types of instruments. So as you visit there, you can remove this token from your board, which unlocks benefits, and put them out on the board and claim it. So that's during game scoring, I should say. And that, by the way, over there is our scoreboard, just so you know. Over here, these are built instruments that you started to build but didn't finish. You'll get half points there. Some patrons have endgame scoring conditions. You'll see here, that's called a double bar line. So you'll score points there. And then you can also upgrade your workers. So eventually you'll be able to specialize your workers like so. If you go hard on one aspect like repairing or maybe performing, you can get specialized workers that are a little bit stronger. So those are a point each, and then every 10 leftover things is a point. So that's endgame scoring, but again, that orchestra is a big part of it. So throughout the course of the game, you put out your workers, you get more workers, you specialize your workers, you vie for first player. That's another thing that happens at the balcony, so you get to resolve actions first. You play 6 rounds, and then at the end of the game, you do endgame scoring. And that's a very, very, very surface level explanation of how you play Luthier. All right, so now that you know a little bit about the gameplay, let's go ahead and work through my 7-point criteria for what makes a good game, starting with the art and components. Now, you already saw from earlier that the art and components in this game are fantastic. The artwork by Vincent Dutrait is amazing. He's one of my favorite board game artists. He's done work on Lewis and Clark and Robinson Crusoe and Unconscious Mind very recently, so his artwork, his art style is fantastic, and for a historically themed game like this with, real life people throughout history, it's really nice to have him doing that realistic portrait artwork. So I really appreciate his artwork throughout this game, in the instruments, in the people that we see, all of it. So artwork is fantastic. The components, of course, you've got wonderful wooden screen printed tokens. All of that is very, very lovely. You've got a whole slew of player pieces that are, kind of custom to you and feel really nice and look really good as well. Now, I should point out that some of the iconography is being tweaked on the cards and some of the components as well. So that is being shifted a little bit to make it more easy for players to read and to play with. And it's important to note also that your components are going to change based on your pledge level, of course. So as you go higher and higher up those pledge levels, you're going to see things like metal coins, you're going to see engraved worker tokens and a big playmat, custom inserts, wooden instrument standees, the conductor's baton, a custom soundtrack, realistic resources, and so on and so forth. So the more you want to play, the more you want, or pay, I should say, and deluxify your copy of Luthier, the better components you're going to get. But overall, from what I see here in the deluxe version, the components are fantastic. Even for the retail version, I feel like things are very, very solid. Great art, great components. Next is complexity versus audience. And I think there's a great match right here between those two things. The weight on BGG right now says 3.73 out of 5, and that sounds about right. This is certainly your medium to heavyweight Euro game, which is what you'd expect from the theme, from the artwork, from the designer Dave Beck, who did Distill. Now, this is a bit heavier than that game, but again, I think that the audience that's looking at this game is expecting that weight of game. So it's a perfect match, heavy game for heavy gamers, basically. Third is thematic integration, and I feel like the designers did a great job of weaving the theme into the gameplay here. Most of it makes a lot of thematic sense. You're a luthier, so you're crafting instruments, you're repairing instruments as they come back into the shop, and those patrons, right? You're building instruments to please them, and you're trying not to keep them waiting too long. That's a really nice thematic twist. Now, the performances, the orchestra first chair battle thing, that part seems like a bit of a stretch thematically. I'm not sure exactly how that's connected to the luthiers themselves, but it still works within that framework of, the classical music era and trying to please the nobility and put on good performances. So it kind of works there. I will say that even that core mechanic of sending out different value workers to those different locations on the board, even that's very thematic, because you can imagine the head of a luthier family sending a more specialized or experienced, son or daughter to a spot where they've been before and they have experience in the repair shop or something like that. So that part's really thematic too, and it helps with, the gameplay and the teach as well. Speaking of the gameplay and the teach, fourth is intuitive mechanics. And I have to say again that pretty much everything you're doing in this game is very intuitive. You go to the market to collect your resources, you're going to use those resources to craft and repair instruments, you're going to please your patrons by putting on performances, all that stuff. And to that point, there was a time where I didn't play the game for a few weeks, and when I got back to the table, I remembered almost all of the rules with a slight rules refresher. So that to me speaks to how intuitive this gameplay is. It's gonna be about an hour-long teach. There's just no way around that. But if you're teaching experienced gamers, you're going to be familiar with and recognize a lot of the mechanisms that are going on in the game, so it comes across very intuitive. So pretty strong for intuitive mechanics here. Fifth is replayability, and the replay value of this game is very high. You've got those 8 starting families, each with different starting resources and that ongoing benefit throughout the game, so that's interesting to explore all those different player powers that are, asymmetric, obviously. And this game offers many different strategies to explore. You can go for a big money game, which is what I tend to do in these kind of games. You can focus on going up those tracks, or you can focus on repairing instruments or performing concerts, so you can kind of vie for good positions in that orchestra seating. So lots of different things to explore, high replay value for sure in this game. Sixth is length and fun factor. And here I have to say that the game tends to go a little bit too long for my personal taste, which, by the way, have been changing lately. I just don't have the patience for a super long game. And for context, my solo and 2-player games were each about 2 hours long, a little bit over 2 hours, and our 3-player game was over 3 hours long. Now, obviously, big caveat that we're learning the game, so, we could shave that down, I'm sure, as we play the game more and more, but you can't avoid that this is a very long game. Now, the Kickstarter page says 90 to 150 minutes. I'm thinking in a 4-player game that could go up to 180 minutes, that 3-hour mark, and that wouldn't be very surprising. So it's a long game, and I think it's curious the way that we add more workers as we go. I guess it's not very curious, but In round 3, you add your 4th worker, and in round 5, you add your 5th worker. So the last 2 rounds of the game, players are resolving many, many more actions and workers, as you progress toward the end of the game. So it feels like the game sort of stretches out as you hit those last 2 rounds, which is not my favorite feeling toward the end of a game, where it's like, oh my gosh, this round took so long. It was like a 40-minute round. So that feeling of stretching is not my favorite thing. One also thing I wanted to point out is it's really hard in this game to plan out your moves. Now, in games where you can kind of, predict ahead of time what you're going to do on your turn, that speeds up the gameplay. But because of how unpredictable the game is and how you don't always have a lot of agency on what action gets resolved in what order, there's a lot of times where a player is going to mess up your plans and you're going to have to divert back to your plan B or even your plan C. And if you don't play it right, that can really throw off your entire round. And then you have to, salvage what's left of this round because all your workers are getting resolved in the wrong order. And that bogs down the game a lot because, a player has to, rethink their whole entire round and strategies. So unfortunately, it can lead to a lot of analysis paralysis because you don't get a chance to plan ahead on your turns always. So all that to say, a little bit long for my taste, but it is really fun. It just feels a little bit long. And my 7th criteria is cost versus value. Now, the retail edition of this game is on Kickstarter right now for $69, which is a pretty good price for a heavyweight Euro game like this. However, you have to factor in, of course, your shipping, which is going to range anywhere from $15 to $25, depending on your pledge level. So even for the retail edition, that's going to come out to just shy of $90, which is certainly pricey. Now, we've already talked about the art and the components and the gameplay are very top shelf. It's a very nicely produced game, but $90 is a lot. And of course, if you're looking for a deluxe edition with the metal coins and some of those other upgrades, now you're talking about a $99 game, which after shipping and taxes is about $125. So this is where you need to think about how am I going to get it to the table? Who am I going to play with? Is this a good $100+ investment for you? And I just wanted to say one more really quick comment on the player count of this game. So with that blind bidding worker placement mechanism, more players is better. It leads to more unpredictability and excitement and dynamism as you resolve the different action spaces and play in certain orders. I've played the solo and 2-player and 3-player, and I will say, maybe in 2 players, you don't get as much of that tension as you do in a 3-player and 4-player game. On the other hand, a 4-player game doesn't mitigate at all for game length. It's not like you use fewer workers. So in my estimation, a 4-player game would be very, very long, given that our 3-player game was already 3 hours, like I mentioned. So just something to consider. Probably 3 players is the sweet spot for a game like this, just so you know. And there you have it. Those are my first impressions of Luthier. Overall, this is a very solid and beautiful game with some really interesting and impressive mechanisms. If you want a closer look, of course, you should watch some other preview videos or check out some playthrough videos as well. There's a whole bunch out on YouTube right now. Of course, you should check out the Kickstarter page as well. There's a link in the description. Don't forget that the Kickstarter ends on August 8th. So check it out, go find out more information, check out the different pledge levels, and in the meantime, have a wonderful week. Take care and happy gaming. Bye.